Hi, Professor Fewer. Thank you so much for being with us today. I really
Great,
appreciate it.
great to see you and happy to be with you.
Thank you. So we have some questions. As you know, we're discussing about repertoire for
Right.
violinists or other string players as well. And you, as a performer and violinist, teacher, faculty member with years and years of experience, can your knowledge can help us a lot, and we all can learn from you. So if there's anything, so let's jump into the questions that we
Sure.
have.
Please.
So the first question that I have is, what are some contexts or concepts you suggest musicians, professionals look into when choosing repertoire for recital program?
Okay, so specifically for recital programs, the days have changed since when I was a student. And when I was a student preparing a recital for school, for a school performance or for a school examination, we might be asked to do specific things like play pieces that are from several different epochs, like three different styles of repertoire. We would usually, back in those days, include some Bach, some Mozart, and then a third. And the third could be romantic or modern or anything like that. However, today things are kind of different. There's no question that I am a firm believer in maintaining a relationship to unaccompanied Bach at all times as a violinist. And I think that's one of the most important things for any violinist to do, is to deepen their relationship to unaccompanied Bach. But in terms of performing a recital, I think a recital is an opportunity for you to show yourself as an artist. And so instead of looking at it from the perspective of what should I do, in other words, what would tell the audience that I'm a good musician, rather than looking at it from that perspective, I would look at it from another perspective: is what do I want to say, and how do I feel certain repertoire selections are things that I'm a good vehicle for. And this is a big topic, of course, but we don't often talk about this in the environment of academic institutions. But to be really frank and honest, not every musician is good at every style of music, and
Mhm.
nor should they feel bad about that. I mean, we as classical musicians, we tend to have to learn more styles than any other type of musician, any other type of genre, because when people say, "Oh, it's just classical," well, inside that just classical realm, we have everything from medieval up until the present day, and those are all different styles and all kinds of different languages, and a whole host of different composers. And so, if you compare that to, let's say, a pop musician, they may have a variety of styles within pop for sure, but the breadth of that, or the spectrum, is much smaller in general terms. So I don't think it's actually reasonable for anyone to think that they're going to be an expert at every style of music or every composer. And so at a certain point in your development, I think it's important to ask yourself, what am I really good at speaking? Am I really good at speaking the language of Korngold? Am I really good at speaking the language of Buxtehude? Am I a really good exponent for Mozart? Should I be serving Mozart? And I use the word serve because we are, as performers, unless we're performing repertoire that's our own, we are servants to the composer. So if you're putting yourself into that role of being a servant, are you a good servant for this person? Are you a good servant for that person? How are you helping their message continue into the future? Those are important things, I think.
Right, that's amazing. Thank you. So the second question is, in your opinion, what are some of the must-have pieces for a violinist to include in their repertoire list? I know it's really based on taste as well.
Okay.
But what is your opinion about it?
Well, again, if we start with what I had mentioned in the previous answer, if you look at it from the perspective of what you're good at, or what you might be a good vehicle for, I do think we still live in a time when we are not going to be abandoning things like Bach anytime soon. And I think it's important for a violinist to have at least one full unaccompanied Bach work at their fingertips. In fact, when I was a student at the Liszt Academy, they used to say, if you were going to be training to be a soloist, you would have to have at least three of the six sonatas and partitas in your fingers at any given time. And the reason was because if you were playing as a concertor with a pianist and your pianist got sick, what were you going to play? So you were strictly trained to have at least three, if not all six, at your fingertips. And then during those days, this is 25 plus years ago. In those days, also, if you were training to be a soloist, and that's what I was doing a lot back in those days, you'd have to have two or three big concertos ready to go at any time. And the idea there was, outside of your own performances, if you were on the circuit and somebody else got ill, and if you got a call, do you have Mendelssohn ready to go? Do you have Tchaikovsky ready to go? So,
Yeah.
in the changing world that we're living in now, just to bring it back to the present, as opposed to thinking of those older days and how they connect, or I should say, I think now we're living in a time where there's so much great repertoire that has yet to be exposed, that when it comes to choosing repertoire for yourself, yes, play your Bach. Yes, you should know your Mendelssohn concerto. Yes, it's good to know a few of the big ones like the Beethoven, the Brahms, and
Mhm.
Tchaikovsky. It's good to know at least one or two of those. Have those in your hands if you're training to be a soloist. But there are also great pieces by lesser known composers that you can take with you and maybe make part of your regular repertoire, and people get to know you by that. From my own experience, I've been really fortunate to have a lot of people write me repertoire over the years. And one big concerto that was written for me was by a jazz musician named Phil Dwyer, which is for stage band and string orchestra. And it's a huge 40-minute work, and it's really great. And yes, it does have me improvising it a lot, but a lot of it's written out, and a lot of it is Phil's language. And I have played that a lot. We made a recording of that. We won a Juno for that one, actually. And that became kind of a signature piece for me.
Right.
So I think that's also something to look at as you're gaining more experience, relating yourself positively with composers, meaning, making yourself known to composers and having them see you perform and having them get to know your creative spark a little bit. That can lead to repertoire that then becomes part of your regular set of repertoire. For example, this week I'm playing a piece that wasn't written for me, although he has written things for me in the past. Quebec composer Serge Arcueil. He wrote a wonderful work for violin and string orchestra back in, I believe, it was 2001, and it's called Episodes, or some people sometimes call it the fantastic episodes of the solitary hero. And it's only a 10-minute long piece, and it's based on the same general concepts of fast, slow, fast as Italian Baroque era concerti grossi, but it's a wonderful piece, and I love it. And I don't know why there aren't like several recordings of this piece out, but every time I perform it with any group I ever bring it to, they all have the same reaction. They all say, "Wow, this piece is incredible," and nobody knows it. So I do feel like, as a performer, you should choose repertoire that you feel like you're a good exponent of that already exists. So have your Bach, have a little bit of Mozart. We're talking about solo stuff here, and have that stuff ready to go. But be very keenly aware of repertoire that's out there that may not be so well known, and that you actually may be a great proponent of if you spend time investing in it.
Amazing, amazing. Um, the third question is, what are some pieces that you think are thinking outside of the box for violinists and are creative choices to include in their repertoire?
Okay. Well, again, there are a lot of really great works out there that people don't know. Um, a few years ago now, maybe over a dozen years ago, I was introduced to the language of the composer George Antheil, and he's written many pieces for violin and piano, and he's written a violin concerto, which I think was only ever performed once in its original form down in
Mhm.
Texas. Um, I don't think it's been performed since. That's a language that's really very attractive to a lot of people now, because while he wrote his repertoire basically for us between the 20s and the 50s, that was seen as quite stark and a little abrasive for the time. But now I've had students play some of those works. And again, these are pieces that when people hear them, they immediately go, wow, how come I didn't know this before? So I think George Antheil is a great one to look at. It may be the case that maybe not all of his pieces are as evenly, um, I don't know, as works of art. They're all very different, and
Mhm.
some of them need help, which just means you have to spend time really as an interpreter, not just looking at the notes on the page, but trying to understand the glue between the gestures on the page. But I think he has a very modern language that I think a lot of people could grab a hold of. There are also a lot of really great works that were written in the last 25 years. I know you know one of them, by LyreIran, which incorporates a performer on stage alone, not just playing the violin, but doing other things. And in the case of the Ryan, there's kind of yelling and screaming and singing and oohing and grunting. And that, of course, is a whole storyline to go with this feminine goddess that he writes about, Bellatrix, for that piece. There are a lot of pieces like that out there. Maybe not with the same type of verve as the Bellatrix, but there are works out there where I think violinists can have a sense of expanding their language or stretching their own personal boundaries a little bit. So I would aim for basically anything written in the last 20, 25 years as a starting point to
Mm.
search for pieces like that. Um, I think that's what I would do first. I mean, there are really great works from before, let's say 1980 or even before 1970 that I really do like. But I think if you're going to look to more modern works as a soloist, particularly if you're in a situation where you're not necessarily playing with piano all the time, having something like that Bellatrix or other pieces that are you alone.
Yeah.
There's another, for example, there's a great work by the composer John Rea
Mhm.
called Schattenwerk, which means shadow play. And it's actually written for two violins. Wonderfully effective work. And again, every time I've played this with another violinist in concert, people always go, "Whoa, where did this piece come from?" It's a really wonderful work, but you can also play that by yourself. You could record one of those tracks if you wanted to and play with that track live or as a recording. And that's another extension of trying to stretch your own boundaries as an interpreter and understanding your own voice by listening back to what you've recorded and then trying to align yourself with it creatively. Those are challenging environments, but I think really rewarding ones to do, to put yourself into.
Exactly, especially these days during COVID,
Yes,
really helpful to know those kind of musics, to just
yes.
be able to play it by yourself, right?
Absolutely. And I think, in fact, if I can use you as an example here in this conversation, like because I've heard you play Bellatrix, there's been a change since I was a student in the sense that I think maybe when I was a student, the reason to play the instrument was expressly to bring beauty into the world. And while I still believe that that's the reason to play music, there's also now in our day, right now, there are so many ways to connect to the outside world and to bring this music to people who have no exposure to it. And usually those connections are things that are values of the day. So right now, things like diversity and inclusivity,
Yeah,
things like women's rights, things like Black Lives Matter, all of these topics are actually wonderfully part of our new way of imagining programming and also us as artists imagining what we can do with music. So instead of it just being, okay, I'm going to play this Brahms G major sonata, one of my favorite works of all time. Maybe I'm going to play the Brahms G major sonata because it has the nickname Rain, and I have a program that is all based on an environmental cause that I'm wanting to support. And
wow.
here's how I'm connecting those dots. So I think that's something that's happening now a lot, and I think it's really exciting. But when I was 18, just starting out at university, we never thought about any of that stuff. We were only just thinking, okay, how do I play in tune better? How can I make my vibrato even more beautiful and my sound bigger? How can I win this competition? Okay, this is how I do it. That's all we were thinking of. And now the people who I think have very positive impact in the world through music, they are using their skills for this sense of attachment to other issues in the world that we are very much a part of. But if we don't make maybe an obvious connection to, it can seem like we are separate from the rest of the world. This is always a danger with being a classical musician, and at least in North America, for most of North America, there's a lot of us who could walk around with a fiddle on our backs, with people meeting us on the street, going, "Oh, so what's your real job?"
Yeah,
And so that sense of connection to be able to bring the rest of the world into what we already believe in and know deep in our bones to be a great art form, we can connect with them through these other topics, through these values that we share.
exactly, exactly. That's really true. Okay, my fourth question is, what are some of the most important chamber pieces that you think any violinist should learn based on your experience with St. Lawrence String Quartet for many years? So
Right.
what do you think?
Well, first off, if you're a string player and you're a violin player, Haydn string quartets are a must. No question about it. Uh, and I would say every Haydn quartet. There's 68 of them officially. I think I've played probably 30 of them now, which is crazy to think at my age, but I feel lucky that I've played that many, but I'm also looking forward to playing the rest of them before I can't, because they're all so darn good. And they teach you so much about the nature of chamber music, regardless if you're playing a first or second violin, if we're talking about violinists, of course, because both of those roles in that repertoire have challenges that are unique. And sometimes they flip too. Of course, the second violin will play as if they're the first violinist. If you listen to a really great recording and that's happening in the score, you shouldn't be able to tell the difference, right, between the two fiddles. Um, and I think that's almost as important for you as a string player as playing unaccompanied Bach as a solo violin player, right? That's where the starting point is. So after Haydn quartets, and again, it's a whole world of exploration within Haydn quartets. If you look at Opus 0, there's actually a work that's Opus 0, and you go up to Opus 77, and then the one after that, 104. That's a whole world of exploration, mountains to climb.
Yeah.
But after that, in terms of other great string works, I've always been a fan of the Brahms sextets, specifically because I feel like the Brahms sextets, if the players are sitting in a certain fashion, which is to say not two violins, two violas, two cellos, but instead two opposing string trios. So violin one, viola one, cello one, and then cello two, viola two, violin two. When you sit like that, you hear voicings that pop out of the score that make you imagine that, in fact, when Brahms was sitting down to write this, he was hearing a spatial acoustic based on this seating. And it's very apparent in the B flat to me. I really believe that. It's less apparent in the G, but it's still there. And I think if you're a string player and you really want to dive into the intricacies of how you hear sound in space, those works, the sextets of Brahms, are really amazing ones to work with. After that, then I would go into another sextet, the Schoenberg Verklärte Nacht. I think is hugely important, hugely important. I'd be remiss if I didn't also say the Beethoven quartets. I feel very fortunate that I've played all of them now in my life, and I do feel a kinship with them. It's a very different type of emotional content than the Haydns, but obviously, like a violinist I know and I really admire a lot, plays with the Muir String Quartet. His name is Peter Zazowski. One time when I was working with him at a festival in Maine, it was in Maine. We were talking about the great works of art in string playing, and he immediately said the Beethoven quartets, and his comment about it I've never forgotten. I thought it was so incredibly beautiful and smart. He said, "Well, when you think about Western civilization and all the art that's come from Western civilization, what are the top two or three contributions?" He said, "It after Shakespeare, Beethoven quartets." like,
Wow.
what else, and that's a really beautiful concept, because again, that's a whole journey. Opus 18 to Opus 135, that's a whole world there. Then I would also go for things like the Bartok quartets for a very different reason. um, Other than that, much more modern things happening these days, works of John Adams for strings, like the shaker loops is always a great thing to learn how to play well together and to kind of master the ensemble feel. You could do that either in a sextet, or you could play it in a string orchestra version as well, which is really great. There are more modern things than that too. There's a really wonderful work by the composer Gary Kulesza, which is called Quasi una Fantasia. It's a string orchestra piece with a concertmaster solo that's huge, and one of my favorite pieces to play. I've only ever played it with him conducting once. Maybe I've done it twice, maybe just once. I'm forgetting, but I remember playing that and thinking, "Wow, this is a masterpiece." And again, there's another great example of a work that was probably written in the early or mid 1990s. And have you ever heard of it before? There's another great example of stuff that's out there that we just haven't heard enough, and we haven't had enough exposure to. I could go on about great string repertoire, like Schoenberg First String Quartet, another one of my favorites. Beethoven String Trios, huge fan of all those. I mean, just I could use up like 5 hours of our
Yeah,
conversation here.
there's so much.
But
Yeah.
but I mean, really, where I started is where I'll end. I'll think that, like, you should really go to the Haydn string quartets right away if you're a violin player, and really get into that repertoire and understand why it's great. Understanding concepts like, well, basically like catch and release, or put another way, in a more humorous fashion with Haydn, it's setting up an expectation and then deviating from that expectation somehow. And that's a certain type of curiosity style mindset that one has to culture from within, if you're not already naturally like that. But I think it's so rewarding to have that in your backbone of who you are as a string player.
Right. Thank you. That's great. Okay, the next one is, do you have any specific genres or themes to suggest a violinist to consider when programming a recital?
Any genres or themes?
Yeah.
So are we talking about violin with piano now?
Yeah, yeah, we
Yeah.
can do that. Yeah.
So that kind of recital. Well, I would say, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, thinking about things that are in our society now, um, things that we're consciously needing to feel like we're putting our efforts into these values that will have long-term positive ramifications. So, I played a recital a couple of years ago. It was part of a program that was designed with an environmental nature in mind, with an organization that wanted to have basically be exposing to birds, ornithologist organization. And so one of the pieces I played was a piece by Schaefer, R. Schaefer, called Wild Bird, which is crazy. And really, I mean, that audience didn't know anything about violin, right? But they loved it because for them, they're listening to this piece and they're all people familiar with birdsong, and they just couldn't get enough of it. So theme wise, you could connect to the environment. I was talking about Brahms, the Rain Sonata. You could connect to feminine power through Bellatrix that we talked about
Mhm.
before. Black Lives Matter. There are a whole host of really great composers of string music. A lot of them American, some Canadian, who are people of color, and we haven't heard them much, right? They haven't made it into the usual discourse of academia and beyond. Um, so I think that kind of programming is going to be more and more the future, and I would really be interested, and I'm going to be really interested to see what younger generations come up with in terms of exact repertoire choices for these types of events. I think if you look at a recital program from the old days, like my teacher's teacher, Oscar Shumsky, he would go out and play a whole recital of like the whole Brahms violin sonatas and then the whole Brahms viola sonatas all on one show. And back in those days, people would just think it was the craziest thing, but he was a master and he could do that. And yet to do that today, to find an audience that would want to come and listen to all that, the people in that audience are going to be a pretty specialized set of people who are already devoted to the repertoire. But if you decide you're going to take one Brahms sonata and then maybe talk about environment and pull out a very industrialist sounding work of George Antheil and you put them side by side, or maybe one of the works by the American composer Michael Dougherty, also very angular and industrial, and then you come out the other end of it with some of the cypresses of Dvorak. And now I'm mixing and matching here because I'm thinking of repertoire with not just violin and piano, but with violin as a
Yeah.
feature. But I think there's a way that I think putting together ideas that are based ideas of repertoire that works together based on something that is connecting to the moments we're living in right now. So, we're having this conversation not long after very sad events in Washington D.C. And as you know, I have been going to Washington D.C. for 20 years almost regularly to work there, and I know that area of DC really well, where the riots took place and where the insurrection took place on the Capitol. And I've often stayed a block away from the Capitol building itself. I know that area really well, and my heart sank when all this became news. And there was part of me that thought, well, what can I do, and how can I help this situation? And there's two answers to that. The first answer to that is to make my music even more beautifully, to devote myself to making the choice of not increasing that mayhem, not giving that any more of my attention, as it were, beyond just knowing that it's existing and recognizing that it's there, and basically being in a position of saying, I understand this exists, and right now here I am in the city of Toronto. I can't be in DC with my friends and help them. I can call them, of course, and I did. I was texting people back and forth on that day and the days after. But as a musician, what can I do here in my home right now? And the answer, as I was going to say, there's two answers to it. The first part of that answer is to devote myself to the art even more fully, to say, no, this is not what I'm going to spend my life choosing. I'm going to choose to really devote myself to creating something beautiful. And then on the other side of it is, how can I program something that may actually help manifest some solutions, or at least increase some dialogues that need to be more regular in in our discourse now. So I actually have a project happening with a wonderful poet who's African American, lives in Colorado. His name is Idris Goodwin. He's an amazing human, and I've been in touch with him recently because I was so upset with what's going on in the States. And we had a wonderful chat. And basically, we've worked together long since before any of this flare up. So our partnership as a duo, I'm the musician guy writing and playing music on a variety of instruments, including violin, of course. And he's a poet who speaks poetry, and we do these. We combine ourselves that way. And now it has more symbolism all of a sudden, because there's
Yeah.
an African American breakbeat poet and playwright, and here's a very white Canadian. I mean, I'm from Newfoundland. You don't get more white than me, right? And yet here we are collaborating in this really rather joyous way. And I have to say, it's taken on much more in my focus, as it were, as a performer, as a creative artist. It now has much more depth of meaning than it ever had. And it just makes me feel very lucky that our paths crossed when they did, and that we were put together by a music festival all those years ago. Because now we have something that can be symbolically maybe of some value to the conversations that we have to have, particularly south of the border. But here in Canada, we have our own issues, of course. So anyway, that's I think the long-winded answer to your question.
Exactly. And it's really great to, express all these feelings and through your music, right? Like, especially these days that there's so much happening around the world, like
Yeah.
so much, sad news that we hear every day. So it's really great to express that through art. I
Yes.
think, yeah, that's amazing. Okay, I'm going to combine the next two questions together. So is where do you think that musicians can get inspired, and where they can find ideas for pieces to play? I think you kind of answered that, but
Interesting. Um, well, the issue of inspiration is a big question, because I think we find inspiration in all kinds of things. We could find it in, the smile of our 2-year-old child, with drool coming out of their mouth and puking up all over your shirt while you're holding onto your baby. Like, you can feel inspired by that, just as its nature and its humanity, all in all of its non-glory, as it were. Yet you sit there kind of in admiration of it as life, and you could be inspired by something like that. Or maybe you're inspired by watching somebody's great achievement. Like, maybe you're watching the Olympics and you see somebody throw the javelin further than anybody has, or do a high jump that just seems impossible, right? You'll watch it and go, how do humans do this? That can be very inspiring. Or maybe you're inspired by conversation with somebody that you really have a great rapport with, and a depth of conversation that you really enjoy when you're with that person. I mean, the list is endless. And I think in terms of understanding inspiration, I think we have to, as musicians, allow ourselves to be inspired by everything rather than just music. And then when it comes to making choices as a result of of being inspired, well, then I think you could kind of tie some of those dots together. In other words, when we're talking about music and we're talking about a refined sensibility of what it means to be human, we're talking about sensations, and we're talking about our senses. We're talking about our inner reality and our inner experience of the world around us. And so if we can identify the way in which we respond to something that's inspiring, like watching Freddie Van Vliet from the Raptors shoot another three-pointer that's impossible, which I just adore, or seeing Kyle Lowry somehow manage to do an impossible fake play on some guy who's about 2 feet taller than him. You can tell I'm a Raptors fan. But I could get inspired by that. But I can take my inner reaction of that experience, and then I can look to pieces of music, and as I listen to them, forget about playing them yet, but as I listen to them, I could listen to them and go, whoa, that's the same reaction I've had when I've watched Freddie Van Vliet do that three-pointer from the center line. Like, that's just, I have the same inner sense happening here. I'm really inspired by this. The tricky thing is, I think, when it comes to the comparison between something like refined music making, sophisticated music making, if you will, and sport, is that sport has the opportunity of having, major accomplishment for the human, but also a fast end to it. And when it comes to understanding great works of music, you have to spend time with a lot of it. So I think one of the pieces that I have been most inspired by in my life has been the first Schoenberg String Quartet. And the reason is not that, the reason is because I played it so much and I've rehearsed it so much. I've recorded it like 3 times. And I'm so in touch with that score basically because I invested so much time in it. You
Yeah.
know, it started with me choosing the piece as a piece that I would write a paper for when I was an undergraduate for my materials class, and then I just devoured it. I didn't understand it when I first listened to it. There was a lot of it. I just kind of scratched my head, going, "How is this music? No, I don't understand. I don't understand." But the more I allowed myself to spend time with it, the more I understood how incredible and how multi-layered that experience is. So in terms of me feeling inspired by that, it's tricky because the process of me being inspired actually only grows and grows further and grows further and grows further with that piece, the more that I've spent time with it. I can't really say the same thing about every piece, because other pieces that I may have played an awful lot that I still love, I'm not sure that they continue to grow in the same fashion as something as complicated as that first string quartet. So, so finding pieces of music that inspire you is not as easy as just going through YouTube and clicking on something, and once the ad is over, probably listening to a piece of music and listening to for 30 seconds and going, no, I don't think I like that. And then going to another clip, and then going to another clip, and then going to another clip, and doing it so rapidly, which is our style of attention these days, of course. If you do it so rapidly, then the opportunity for you to relate to it on a deeper level goes right out the window. So if
Yeah.
you're looking for a sense of inspiration and it's just by a single listening, you may be careful. I would suggest being careful that in fact there might not be that much in that piece beyond that quick initial aha that you were attracted to. So if you're, do you really want to spend 20 hours, 25 hours of your life looking at it? Because is it just that much inspiration? Or is it a piece that you feel like, oh, this is really, I don't understand all this. Wait a second, how can I learn from this? And I guess that's the key when it comes to being inspired. For me, the greatest inspiration is, it always comes from learning, or a sense of observing the world in a way that I haven't before, and then having a new sense of understanding. For example, I have a little keyboard here 3 feet away from me, and I sit down sometimes and I just play different chords. They're from a jazz book, and I'll sit there and I'll listen to voicings. And I was looking at this thing called the man tooth. If any of your listeners are interested in keyboard voicing techniques for jazz stuff, I was playing around with this book called The Man Tooth, and I discovered, whoa, so that's why this voicing works when you always use the tonic in the top voice, or that's why the fifth is there, and that's why the tonic is actually in the middle voice of this 5-part tri. Well, this is really cool. Like just the learning of that. I mean, I'm going to bet that when you first learned English, how old were you when you first started learning
I
English?
think I was 12, 13.
And I bet part of it was really scary, right?
I was, yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
But when you learned new words and then you used them and you used them successfully, didn't that feel amazing?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
just like, oh, you would be, I bet you would be thrilled. Like you figured out how to go to the post office and ask for stamps and finally get this thing and not have to worry about your English and even say a word you didn't use before, and you used it once or twice perfectly and they understood you and there was a smile on their face.
It's really satisfying. Yeah.
Smile on your face, and you left so inspired, right? You felt so good by that interaction because it was a learning curve. So I would deepen the learning and pair that with the whole inspiration thing, because I think we're, as humans, it's easy to be attracted to something that's just shiny and glowing. You know, they say that when humans wake up, the first thing they do is look for the horizon, for the body to kind of adjust itself, and light. And so it's easy for us to just immediately be attracted to the light. It's kind of like the screen here in front of us. We spend so much time in front of a screen these days that we don't even think about it, but we are immediately drawn to the screen because it's just this glowing thing. Like, just think about cats. If you take a flashlight and you play with a cat with the flashlight going around the wall, the cat will go nuts. We are the same way. We are the same way. So that's why I say being careful about the whole inspiration. If you're just flipping through YouTube one night, go, oh, that's really cool. You want to be careful. You want to be careful. It may be great, or you might just want to learn a little bit more about it and learn whether or not, oh, I'm really going to learn a lot with this. And learning is going to be the inspiration that's really going to continue moving my career or my sense of wanting to be a musician forward.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that also applies to other kind of arts as well. Like you might just watch a movie for the first time and you don't know the director or like the style of the movie, and then for the first time you're like, okay, I don't understand this. But you might want to like, watch that movie for the second time, and then you'll be like, oh my God, that's so inspiring. I can understand and relate to the language of this movie now, or like a painting or like whatever, right? Like it
Yep.
works in other kind of arts as well, I think, not
Absolutely.
just music. Yeah.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, I don't have any kind of mastery of understanding of visual art,
Mhm.
but I do believe that when I go to a great museum or a museum that has a really great work of art on the wall, I do believe somehow I am being impacted by the experience of sitting and letting the experience kind of go through me. And and that is something, while a lot of it may be unconscious, I do find that to be incredibly enriching and rewarding. And
Mhm.
I think again, if I was to learn more about that particular piece of art that I'm sitting in front of for 20 minutes or something, if I learn more about it, then that just
Yeah,
deepens the experience even more. So I totally agree.
yeah, exactly. Okay, perfect. So the next one is, in your opinion, what pieces attract the attention of an audition committee?
Okay, so auditioning for,
For violin performance.
so like, like undergraduate degree
Yeah,
specifically.
undergraduate is fine.
So I asked that question because I guess it's slightly different in terms of putting a program together for undergraduate than it is for graduate programs. At
If
the
you can
graduate,
let us know a little bit for grad school as well, that would be great.
well, so for grad schools, I'll start there and back up. But for grad schools, generally speaking, you're starting to show at that point. Uh, you should be showing at master's level, and then definitely at any kind of PhD level or DMA level, you should be really showing that this is what your output's going to be about as a performer, and I'm willing to research and look into this repertoire a lot for my graduate work. Um, and that doesn't happen overnight. Of course, that's part of what the undergraduate experience is all about. Now, it's sometimes faster discovered by some people than others. Sometimes it takes a long time for people to understand these things. But in this day and age, here in Canada, um, we still live with most schools wanting to have you here. Sorry, wanting to have you play and us here as the adjudication panel. We still want you to be playing unaccompanied Bach, and I'll always agree with that. They always want to hear you play a concerto of some sort, and usually at undergraduate degree level, the concerto choice, they're going to be anything from Konis concerto up to Prokofiev concerto. Some people will play Tchaikovsky. A lot of Mendelssohn's and Brooks will be in there. And then, if there's a third piece, sometimes people want to hear you play a caprice, like a Paganini caprice. Um, and the caprice is one of these things where I think if you have those three things ready to go for your undergraduate experience as at an audition, the caprice is what freaks everybody out, most people, right? And the reason is simple. Coming back to a comment I made 20 minutes ago, not every performer is going to be great at every kind of music. And to think that we are is actually shooting ourselves in the foot, because how do you spend more time as an interpreter or as a creative artist in repertoire that you really are the best avenue for or advocate for, if you're spending all your time learning how to play a Paganini caprice that you'll never play more than once. Now, the thing is, it does serve a valid purpose. So people can learn how to play a few Paganini caprices. I think I only know 5 or 6. I don't know the whole book. And I haven't played one of those in public in 15 years, maybe more. But when you're starting out, to learn what you learn from it is excellent, really excellent. But if you don't walk in and play Paganini 24 perfectly at your undergraduate audition, don't feel like you're a total loser, because most people don't. Most people will come in and they'll play they might nail it or they might not, but most people have a big dark cloud over their head when they're trying to challenge themselves to play that stuff. But it doesn't translate into your career, right? It translates into maybe you learning some really great things for yourself technically on the instrument and taking those lessons into other pieces of music that you will play a lot. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're bad if you can't do it. And I've seen a lot of people lose heart when they get excited about being a musician, and they love the violin and they're really excited about going to music school. This Paganini Caprice is killing me. Oh no. And they freak out totally about it. And so when they walk in, they're freaking out. And of course, if you're already freaking out, what's going on out here is not going to be helped, right? So it's still on a lot of lists, the Paganini thing. I'm gonna bet it'll be there probably in 25 years again from now, because we tend to shift our gears pretty slowly in the academic world. But I would just strongly say to anybody listening to me talk and rant about this, don't get down about it. Like, play it to the best of your ability and realize that we're sitting there going, hey, look, if you can play a Paganini Caprice with, your hands tied behind your back, that's great. You're like a circus act. But if you only play it, pretty well, that's totally fine, because you're not going to be playing Paganini for your career. I mean, only like these days, how many people do that as a career choice? That number is like been doing this, which is interesting, because the number of people who are able to play it is starting to get a little bigger, because there are more people interested in playing this stuff now. So that number gets bigger, but the number of people who actually have that as the reason for their career, smaller and smaller and smaller. And that also brings up this whole topic of, when you're doing an audition, are you presenting yourself like an athlete that's in training? It's like, okay, I'm going to do this audition as if I'm doing a 100-meter dash. I'm going to make myself as strong and as fast and as nimble as Carl Lewis or whoever. And are you doing it from that perspective? And if you do it from that perspective, you'll probably do well at the undergraduate admittance level. That's probably going to do really well. But long term, if that's the only focus, then you have to ask yourself, do I want a career that's based on this? And some people do. I've seen it for sure. But more and more, I think because of the world we're living in, more and more people will say, okay, well, I really loved my days of training, but now I'm trying to connect with the rest of this world. And if I'm just out there playing Paganini 24 and nobody's really feeling like it has anything to do with the trees growing across the street, or the dogs pooping in the park in the wrong spot, or getting upset about the price of avocados being too high in the winter, like everybody's got their stuff going on in real life. And if you're just trying to keep playing this Paganini 24 Caprices as the only thing, well, sure, you'll get a lot of admirers for that, but you're blocking out a whole rest of the world that you could connect to with music. And so I keep seeing people like your generation and more, the people after you are going to be even more this way. They want to find a way to make that music connect to the rest of the world. So when you come in to do your audition, yes, you can take the position of training yourself like an athlete, because that's good at that level, at that time in your life. But if you come in and you say, okay, I'm going to play unaccompanied Bach. So you play your movements of unaccompanied Bach, and it's really beautiful. And everybody goes, wow, this person plays Bach really well. And now I'm going to play this concerto by an Iranian composer you've never heard of before, named ... And everyone goes, oh, never heard this before. And you play it, and you play it with heart. You play it just like because your soul is into it. We have no choice but to sit back and go, wow, this is unbelievable. Because it's you, right? Like, in other words, you are really committing to this language that we don't know. Now, maybe in 25 years, we will know this repertoire better. But right now, we sure don't. So if you come in from that perspective, you'll succeed. If you come in and you do your concerto by somebody we've never heard of before, and it's got heart and soul, and you play it well, we're going to love it. You play your Bach well, we're going to love it. You play your Paganini then only okay, don't worry about it. I keep coming back to that, because as you know, violinists, we tend to be super geeked out about every last little detail. And I think that's important at a certain point, and in different points of one's career. You keep coming back to that to refine things. But the message and the content of the music itself, you need to really believe in it. All right. So I don't know that I ever really believed in Wieniawski F sharp minor concerto the way that I believe in Shostakovich First Violin Concerto. Those are two separate lines of expression. They're both great. They both have their place. But in terms of Wieniawski F sharp minor, I'm using that as an example because that was the piece my teacher gave me when I was a teenager to whip me in the butt and help me play technically well. That was the piece that really got me in shape. But then playing Shostakovich is like a spiritual experience of transformation. And it's such a whole other world of expression. If I was told, okay, you're only going to play one more concert ever, and it's going to be one of these two concertos, which one are you going to pick? I'll be picking the Shostakovich without any thought. I'm not going to be thinking Wieniawski.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. That's really inspiring. Um, okay, the next question, um, I think you kind of answered this. What do you think a student's performance can bring into the audition or a performance that is interesting to the faculty or the audience? I think you answered that, but if you want to add something else to it, or
So
we can jump to the
you're
next.
talking about repertoire again, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So, you know, when it comes to repertoire, when you're coming into a classical music school, I will say this. If it's repertoire that we don't know, we're curious people. And because we're curious, we love to learn about new things we have not been exposed to. And we're really hoping that those pieces of music will be great because we want to hear great new things. So if you come in, you play repertoire that you like, and we don't know it, but we know music, and we listen with these curious ears, and it turns out the piece is actually really simple and not much musical content, that probably won't impress us.
Mhm.
Right? So at that point, then in your audition, your Paganini must be unbelievable, and your Bach has to be perfect, because that third choice, if it's a piece we don't know and it comes across to us, who know we know music and we know the ingredients of music. If we listen to those ingredients for the first time, we go, no, 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 that's just not a very good piece at all, and we kind of throw away it with disinterest. If you do that, then the other two pieces are going to have to be amazing. And
Right.
if the other two pieces are just okay, you're going to have trouble getting into your program.
Mhm.
So that's one thing I'd be really careful with. And to answer that question with repertoire that we might not know, you're going to have to rely on teachers that you are working with when you're a student. You know, like those people have a responsibility to you as students to help you make smart choices in terms of repertoire to be used. When I was a student in my undergraduate degree, actually at the University of Toronto, my third year recital, my teacher said, okay, I want you to play a big modern work, and I want you to go out and find something I don't know. I want to hear something new, but it has to be good. And so I was like, oh boy, how do I do that? Now, at the time, I was in touch with another violin teacher who I was seeing during the summertime months at festivals in the States. And I contacted him and I asked him if he had any ideas. And he said, oh, yeah. He said, yeah, actually, I just recorded this really cool piece. It's a big, chunky piece by a British composer named Kenneth Leighton called Metamorphosis or
Mhm.
Metamorphose. And I said, okay, great. I'll see if I can check it out. So I got the score. Uh, he sent me his recording, which he had just done. I sat back and I didn't understand it right away, but I knew it was huge and it seemed to fit the bill of what my then teacher wanted me to do. Well, I ended up loving that piece. And it was a lot of work to put together with the pianist. The pianist was amenable to doing it. These days, if I was to try play it again, I'd be hard pressed to find a pianist willing to invest that kind of time learning the piece because it's really challenging, but really worthwhile. So I played that at my third year recital. Nobody on the panel knew it, you know, and that was like 25, 30 minutes of music. And so while I got a great mark, thankfully, it was partly because the rest of the repertoire on my recital was stuff they knew really well. You know, I had a Mozart sonata they really knew. I played Ravel sonata. They all knew that super well, whatever. But the Leighton, big chunky part of the recital, they didn't know, but it was really interesting. And there are musicians listening to it. So all the comments I got from that recital were like, wow, thanks for introducing me to this piece I've never heard of before. And it seems like it's really great. We were following the score as you were playing. There's a lot of really interesting things in the score. Bravo for learning something new. So in a sense, my teacher, you know, he taught me the lesson the hard way, but it was so worth it because that turned out to be a great experience for me. And it also, by the way, helped me not have to feel like I was just going to go out and play pieces that everybody knew
Mhm.
and heard on recordings for 30 or 40 or 50 years. And therefore, if I didn't match the quality of every recording that people have in their ear, then I'm going to get a worse grade. So I may have actually gotten such a good grade in part because it's not me trying to be living up to a recorded standard, right?
Wow.
So that's certainly possible.
That's great. Thank you so much. Um, okay. Now I want to ask your advice about some of these questions. The first one is your advice to all musicians suffering from lack of motivation, especially these days because of COVID.
Well, there's no denying it's not an easy time for us.
Yeah.
Um, I would say the first thing to be aware of is that if history is any um, any example for us to learn from, after the Spanish flu, there was, a few years after that all happened, there was a massive explosion of interest in the creative arts. They refer, and also in industry and the economy. They refer to that time as the Roaring Twenties, which is a time when everything was going on all cylinders and there was so much going on. And I think people can actually look forward to that again, meaning that even though we're all locked down still, and who knows when really the end game of all this is going to be playing itself out. Some people like to think it's going to be, by the summer. Other people think it might be the fall. Other people think it might just be gradually over a few years before we really have concert experiences with a full house again, because people will be apprehensive to go into those spaces again. So regardless, though, at some point, I do think we can look forward to, and I think anyone who's feeling down about it can look forward to the future actually being with a lot more opportunity, because people are going to be out there doing all kinds of great things, because it's all this pent up energy we're sitting here with no outlet, right? Or with very few of the regular outlets we're used to. So if you're an undergraduate student and you're coming in first year, by the time you finish your undergraduate degree, we're going to be well out of this. And that means at that point, we're going to see another version of the Roaring Twenties. And of course, I'm just thinking now at the top of my head, we will actually still be living in the 20s, but the 2020s. It's going to be another Roaring Twenties for us. So I think they can look forward to that. And I think knowing that there is something like that to look forward to is often a good thing to carry when you're having the blues with what's going on right now. I also think we do have this opportunity that didn't exist when the Spanish flu was happening, and that is that you and I can connect on these screens. And one of the silver linings of this whole lockdown has been, for me personally and for my students, to connect with other violinists around the world who, in the past, you'd have to find money to fly somebody in, put them up in a hotel for a few nights, take them out for dinner. I love all that stuff. I love that life, and I miss it. But I can call up a friend of mine on the other side of the globe, and I'll know that they're probably not going to be that busy. And I can say, hey, would you give like a masterclass to my students? And it doesn't cost me the same amount of money. So oftentimes my friends are saying, oh, I'll just do it for free. Don't worry about it. Like, it's just great to connect, because we're the lucky ones in this environment. We still get a paycheck, and we're inside the academic world, at least we do. So that's been a silver lining. And having a chance to have some of my students connect with some of these players, I think I've seen some really great growth from my students as a result of those interactions, which are things in the past which would have been few and far between comparatively, because I'm trying to do it now, every few weeks. And to have that ability for my students to have exposure to all these great people around the world, and just know my friends are available. I can call somebody in London and say, can you do this? Oh yeah, no problem. When do you want to do it? I'm available. We'll make it work. Just think, before COVID hit, that probably wasn't happening very much at all. Yet the technology did exist, right? We did have the technology in front of us to do it, but we weren't really doing it because we were really, and for a good reason, really believing that we have to be in the same space. And I still believe that's the case. But the silver lining of this particular time we're living in is that we can have these new connections through the screen, that when we're through all this stuff, we'll probably see a hybrid of that moving forward. So if you're feeling down, there are certainly a lot of things online to kind of probably look at and test the waters of if you're a student. And even maybe through your teacher at the time, maybe they know somebody that you can get a lesson with that you haven't met before, just for new inspiration and new ideas. It is not an easy time, and I'll be honest, it's not been easy for me too. I've been up and down since all this has been going on, and on the days that aren't up, I try to take, on a personal level, I try to take great joy in the smallest of things, whether it's like squeezing a lime on my avocado in the morning, or the smell of my green tea, because I love great sencha tea. And the small things, suddenly, you focus on them in a different way, and the depth of that experience can sometimes bring some really great joy and beauty to your day. But I know it's not easy, and I'm also at a different point in my life where I think if I was 18 and this was going on, I'd be going nuts. I mean, I've got a 16-year-old that stepdaughter that, she's doing really well with all this, but there are hard days, not being a teenager and not being able to be with your friends. That's rough, and that's in some ways scarring, I think, for a lot of people. So it's different for us though as we're older. It's a drag, but we will, as they say, we will see the other end of this. There's no question.
I
I
really
was
hope.
I was thinking the other day about a song that was written by a guy named Cat Stevens. You ever heard of that guy?
Yeah.
Um, the song is called "Morning Has Broken," and it was very famous, long, long, long time ago. And it goes, "Morning has broken like the first morning." Beautiful song. And I was thinking the other day about it, going, now why is that so great? Why do I really love that? When I hear that, why do I love hearing that? And I think one of the reasons is because this is maybe off topic, but something to be inspired by. He starts, and the first thing he does is he sings a whole octave, and then he goes one tone above the octave. That's such a joyous gesture in itself. It's like, I'm waking up. This is a beautiful world I'm in. I love this. Isn't this incredible? And I'll go even a tone higher. And then twice in the piece, he modulates up a step. So you get that whole, oh, even higher. We're being raised, we're being raised, we're being raised. I mean, I just thought to myself, how is it that is always a song that gets me? It's just so, it's very simple, but it's so incredibly joyous. And I'm always kind of uplifted by it when I hear it in my ear, or when I choose to sing it or play it on speakers. Just it almost always lifts my spirits, that one, if for some reason I'm feeling down. Other classical pieces that do it for me, thinking about your people listening to this interview who are interested in classical pieces that really uplift them. I like the Bach. I'm total geek this way, but I love the Bach Third Brandenburg Concerto.
Wow, yeah.
And if I'm feeling down, there's a really great recording of that by a group from Montreal called the Ensemble Caprice, and I'll put that recording on, and I'll suddenly be super happy again in 3.5 minutes. Or other great pieces of music, Beethoven 9. Like, if you really, I get teary-eyed thinking about it, but like, having played that a bunch and having lived that experience in huge cavernous spaces, sometimes that's uplifting beyond all else. It's just hugely powerful, and to listen to it, uh, I get taken back, of course, to some of those experiences. But I'm also just so thrilled that it exists, that
Right.
that music is out there at all, is an incredible thing. And I'll use that and grab a hold of it if I'm feeling down.
Thank you for sharing with us. Yeah, that's great. Okay, the next question is your advice on mindful practice.
Okay, so can you tell me what you think mindful practice is?
Um, I personally think as you grow as a musician, so you learn better how to manage your time and practice efficiently. Like
Right,
instead of practicing hours and hours, you can just focus and have like 3 hours of practice, but know exactly what you're doing in the practice room.
right,
Like you can just plan ahead. Like that's what I usually do. Like I have a plan. I have a planner that I like a day before my practice at nights. I write down like what I did in the day, and then I plan the next practice day, that what I want to do. And then I try to see how much of the plan I achieved at the end of the day. And that was really helpful for me. But I think everybody's different.
right,
But it's really important to find the way that works for you
right.
personally.
For me, the term mindful practice for me always refers to a sense of self-exploration on the instrument and learning about yourself through the practice itself. It could be a very simple thing like turning on a metronome, playing something slowly, and watching basically watching yourself, and
Mhm.
you could see, oh, my third finger doesn't want to do that. Why does it not want to do that? If it's not doing that, what is it doing? And learning about yourself that way. Oh, okay, so I have to train this to do something else now. Okay, follow me, do this. This is what I want you to do. Don't do that other thing now. Come gently, just do this thing now. That's mindful practice, where you are becoming aware of what your physique is doing already, and then trying to find a way to tell it gently that you would like it to do something else. So and then that relationship over time is built to hopefully a point where the piece of music you're playing, you have a certain type of rapport with.
Right.
I dare and say the word mastery over. That sounds so aggressive and masculine in the negative sense. I will own you. Maybe I practiced like that for a bunch of years, but these days I feel as I love my practice time, when I'm sitting there with the instrument, it's really about those moments of self-learning. So there are lots of things I can't play people always say to me, "Fewer man, like you can sight read anything." Yeah, I guess I am a pretty good sight reader, but it's partly because I sight read a lot for a lot of years, so I can do that. But I certainly can't sight read everything. And sometimes something will be put in front of me. I'll go, "Oh boy, oof. Okay, I'm gonna have to get out the clippers here and just like start trimming the hedge before I can see what clearly is there." Um, I got one actually 2 weeks ago from a composer in Hong Kong, solo violin piece he wants me to play, and he sent me this PDF, and I opened it up and I went, "Whoa, oh boy!" So I'm not able to just like sit there and go through it and go, "Oh, I think I know what this sounds like." No chance. So in those circumstances, I will look at those pieces, and again, I'll say to myself, "Okay, now why is it I can't sight read this?" Like, I'm not saying that that's the end goal, but I'm saying if I can't sight read it, it's because me as a piece of machinery is looking at this as a piece of information, and the relationship is not well oiled yet. All right, I'm not in good relation with this. This relationship's not working yet, but I can try to make it work. So I can look at it and I can break things down into their smallest ingredients, and then it'll maybe asking me to do something crazy, and I'll go, "Okay, I've never done that before. Now, how would I do that? And how would I connect that gesture from something I already know as a violinist? Because it has to connect to something or else it really won't work." So that process for me is something I really love. I've had more time to devote myself to that now because of the lockdown and not being away all the time. And I've enjoyed that a lot. But it's also kind of scary because when you're looking at a piece of music that you know you really want to play a certain way and you can't yet, then you have to come to grips with you as a mechanical being are not able to play this thing that you already really love, right? And that's a certain kind of stress that you have to iron out for yourself, and that can be challenging for us when you're not able to already get it because you already feel it and you already have the sound in your inner ear and you can't deliver on that. That's really frustrating, right? So
Yeah.
again, you're learning about yourself and you're learning about that chasm or that bridge, let's say, that you have to cross in order to have that clear and easy relationship between what's on the page and you as a piece of machinery. So I hope that answers your question in terms
Yeah,
of my.
totally. Yeah, I personally learned so much from you, like about mindful practice in our lessons. That was great. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, the next question is your advice on social distancing artistic plans.
Social, say that one more time.
Social distancing
Yep.
artistic plans, like during COVID.
What you mean? What to do during the
Yeah,
time we can?
like any inspiration. What are the ideas that comes to your mind that can help us?
Hmm. You know, I was talking to a colleague yesterday about the fact that we can't play chamber music, right?
Right.
And he had this really great idea, which I'm going to share with my string colleagues at the University of Toronto tomorrow in an email. He said that what he's now doing with string quartets that he was coaching in the past that can't get together anymore, he says they all meet online here in Zoom, the Zoom world, and they all have their parts, and each person plays their part while the other three are on mute. But while that person is playing their part, the other three play their parts individually. So they're hearing the other person play. They're not hearing the other three people play. They're just hearing the one person who's not on mute. And so you can play lightly your part while listening. Let's say I'm the first violinist and we're playing Ligeti quartet or something, and you're playing viola. And so you're playing the viola part, and that's all you hear. And I'm playing my first violin part along with it as we do it. And then we switch. So then you're hearing my part and the other three parts you're not hearing, but everyone else has their instruments and they're playing along with as they hear this one line. And I think that's actually not a bad idea because in classical music, of course, in refined string playing stuff, particularly, the technology really doesn't exist yet. It's kind of the law of physics. I don't know if we're ever going to get there, where we really are able to be 100% in time with each other. There's still this latency issue. And yes, there are apps out there. I've tried a lot of them that have better or worse latency, but nobody yet has just
Mhm.
bang on perfect. So I think that's not a bad idea. You know, you could, if you're a string quartet in a school or trio or duo or whatever, and you're wanting to play or rehearse together, it's not going to be the same kind of efficacy of a real rehearsal, but you might actually learn a fair amount if you have yourselves together online like this, and you've got the whole score in front of you, maybe with your iPad and a pedal, so you don't have to turn the page manually, and you could learn what's going on in the score and learn everybody else's part while you're lightly playing your part at the same time. I think that for the next several months could be something really of value for a lot of students.
Yeah, it's better than nothing. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, my last question is your advice for new music graduates starting a professional career. That would be really helpful for me too.
So you one thing I would say that I was never taught, but now that I've been out of school for 25 plus years, getting to close to 30 years. Um, One of the things I was never taught, but I now know is super true. The relationships you make in your undergraduate and your graduate degrees, basically all the relationships you make in music, that could stem back to youth orchestra times, or maybe other students in the same studio as your first teacher. For example, my first teacher that I grew up with in Newfoundland, I was one of like 8 kids. 6 of us are pro, you know. I mean, that's ridiculous. 6 out of 8 in professionally happy in the biz, like that's incredible. Uh, Tip my hat off to my old teacher, Mrs. Eileen Kearns. Um, but yeah, those relationships all mean something, and you're not necessarily aware of it when you're going through it. But down the road, if you take care of these relationships in school days, down the road, that's going to pay off dividends hugely. So all these gigs that maybe as you start your freelance life that are starting up, you could be maybe not the best player, or you could be uh, any number of different permutations here. Let's say you're the best player, but you're a total jerk, and you've treated everybody really badly during your undergraduate degree. And somebody in the undergraduate degree who thought you were a total jerk because you were all uppity about your talents and abilities, they're putting an orchestra together for a gig, and everybody's getting paid $500 for a day's work, and they're not going to call that guy because he's always such a jerk. Well, that doesn't help you with your career, does it? If you're that person, if you were, let's say, pretty good but not the top talent, but you really had good meaningful relationships to your friends, then there's going to be somebody out there who's got like, oh, you know what, I'm hiring for XYZ symphony and we need a violinist for the next 6 weeks, can you do this? It's like $1,200 a week, can you do it? And you go, oh, I'd love to do that. I mean, this is how you start, right? You start with these connections. So the nature of those relationships early on, knowing that they build a sense of, let's call it body memory, as opposed to anything else, it's a sense of security that you have with people and that you trust because you've had a past together that was positive. This is why, like, if you run into friends from childhood, it's the greatest thing ever. Like, I reconnected with one of my best buds from childhood in Newfoundland recently in Vancouver. Oh my God, it was just the greatest thing ever. And all those old memories, the body still holds on to. And when we first saw each other after not seeing each other for 37, 8 years, like it was amazing. It was, and we're now like still quite in contact and delighted to see each other. Haven't, of course, now for over a year, but that's really important to know now. So even if you're out of school, you started your career, things are going pretty well, make sure that those opportunities that will come up because you have been inside a music school environment, they will come up. Make sure that you have not alienated yourself by treating all those around you during your school days as being lesser than you, or just you basically being stupid to them or being a jerk. Don't do that. Like, really don't do that. That's a hugely important thing. Now, yes, you might have your own individual plans, but you want to go somewhere else. You want to leave that town and get a job in Berlin or somewhere. Like, that may all happen, but those relationships will still be important.
Right.
It will still be really important. I'll give you an example from my past. I went to school with, remember last summer we had a class with Simon Blendis in London, England. We went to school together. And I haven't seen him in well over 20 years. And yet, when I called and asked him to do this, of course, he was like, oh, I'd love to do it. That'd be great. And that connection was so easy because our past was so positive. Really important to see that, right? Super important, valuable thing for everyone to know. So if you commit to all of those relationships that are around you right now inside your musical environment, they will blossom into things that you can't predict moving into the future. It doesn't mean you don't keep doing your auditions for your orchestra job if you want that, or getting into a teacher's college to get a certificate to help you get into a teaching position or something. It doesn't mean any of that, but it just means that you need to know that those relationships will, in the future, many of them will have the word opportunity suddenly come up for you, and you want to be the kind of person that they will call because their memory of you from the past was all very positive. I actually think, my last thought on this, I think that's why I won the job of concertmaster in Vancouver. And it's because I spent 9 months there 10 years before I got that job. I spent 9 years in that orchestra sitting in chair number 3 while somebody else was on sabbatical. Now, when I went there, I had no intention of staying there for more than the 9 months. And so I didn't, but when I left, I had had really great relationships with everybody. So when the concertmaster job was open and they called me about it, when I went out, yes, a lot of the same people were there, and they had a 10-year-old memory of me being a certain way, and it was a positive memory. So then when it came to like the conductor making a choice for the person to get the job, I really feel like possibly that's one of the reasons I was that I was the front runner, or at least that I got the position, because of those relationships from 10 years before having been so positive, and the memory having been positive. Because I know that conductor really well, and I know he was sensitive to everyone in the orchestra trying to find the right person for this job. That position lay dormant for several years, and they were really taking their time to find the right person for it. So it felt right to me when I sat down. It felt right for the conductor. It felt right to all these people in the orchestra. It just felt like the right thing. So I think that's how that happened, or at least that's a large part of it.
Right, wonderful. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Mark. I really, I'm so grateful for what you've said today. I definitely learned so much from you, and that was amazing. Yeah, thank you so much.
Always
I'm
a pleasure,
really
Saba.
looking forward for more of these conversations together.
Well, good luck. Good luck to you, and it's really, of course, great to see you. And let's not be strangers. Good luck to all of your viewers in their choices forward, and let's hope that 2021 ends better than it started.
Yeah, I really hope so as well. Thank you.
Okay.